Well, kia ora and good morning, John. Great to be here with you. It was good to talk to you again in the webinar that we had recently. It's good to have you back today. I think during that session, we got a sense of some of the things that you were excited about, and so we wanted to talk to you and get you into our post-COVID vision series. To those of you watching the video, we're looking at the idea that crisis is not just a disruptor, it's an accelerator, and certainly through the COVID experience, we saw a momentum occur. And we want to talk with thought leaders around from different parts of industries and in different areas, just around, how do we keep that momentum going and what sort of technology will we see coming in the future? So today we're going to be talking to John Ascroft. He's the CIO of Jade Software. I think that's quite a limiting role from the discussions I've had with John. He's got a much bigger brain than that, and he seems to think quite broader. He's had a variety of technical management roles at what is an iconic New Zealand software company. He's a budding aviator, rides fast motorcycles, I've given that up, and is a history buff. So we're going to be talking to him now about a few words. It's just a nice chance to sort of chew the fat and think about things going forward. So welcome, John. Good to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
So we're going to start with this word digitization, because we've seen this in quite a few places, and it's one that I've started using. So when you use the word or see the word digitization, what are you thinking about?
Well, I think for me, digitization is really about a move from physical. So physical things impose a certain way of doing stuff that we can avoid or speed up with digitization. So if I have to physically go to a shop and look at what products are for sale, firstly, I only see the things that that shop has. And secondly, I have to take all that time. So digitization for me is about, firstly, convenience, but it's also about a move to a more real-time environment so that it enables things to happen straight away at the speed of light, which is, your electrical speed.
Yep.
And it also involves, and I think this is the subtle part of it, a power transfer from supplier of products and services and information to the consumer, because that power is now much more in the hands of the consumer. And that has quite deep ramifications for all sorts of...
Yeah, look, you've been involved in the industry for a long time. And we've read a lot about, there was examples of this occurring during the COVID-19. So what are some of the examples that you saw, that you interacted with during the COVID-19 lockdown that you took notice of?
Yeah, I think the lockdown was interesting because it did accelerate some trends. And the obvious thing for me to say, and I will say it because I have to, is that we moved a lot more to an online environment, like what we're doing now with Zoom and Teams, running meetings. And there's an obvious view of that we did that, but it also has involved things like the ability for people to be truly remote, so that we've had people, for example, going on holiday, but then working one day of their holiday, and it's no different than if they're in the office because we're all on Zoom or remote. I think online commerce has been accelerated, so we've seen things like the major grocery chains have to expand their home delivery capability. And that's not going to go away just because people could go to the supermarket now. And finally, I think in education, there's been some really interesting changes and developments through the enforced online learning.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? That, those examples, I sort of talked to them about being forced, but, if we're going to keep going, I'm going to ask you to think about, in your personal view, how do we, as an economy or a community, ensure that momentum that occurred during lockdown, that it just doesn't peter off, or we just accept that's the new normal, but just sort of go, we got to keep that going. So how do we work that momentum up?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting and exciting stuff. And I think, first of all, not just because this is a TUANZ video or webinar,
Yeah.
our UFB has been a huge enabler for us. And when I talk with my friends and colleagues in Australia and they're suffering through NBN, you realise what a great job we've done as a country in putting that core infrastructure into place. And if we'd had to go into lockdown 5 or 6 years ago on copper, things would have been completely different. At the least, we would have been saying to our kids, you guys can't watch Netflix because I've got to work video conference. Whereas with UFB, the whole family can do its own thing. I think the other things as a society, I think, and it sounds trite, but I think the whole kindness thing and the way New Zealand as a country seemed to come together over COVID to work together to beat this thing has been a truly great thing, and it would be wonderful if we could carry that forward.
Really, I just thought pull something out there. You talked about, you're absolutely right. If we'd tried to do this 10 years ago on ADSL or whatever we had in those days, which we thought was the bee's knees, we've invested money in UFB and it's obviously come to a fruition. You talked about in there about, if you'd, in that environment, if you'd had kids at home, if you'd been working together, there's that sense of, because you had UFB, you could do that. But what happens if you didn't, or if you didn't have access to, decent connectivity, or you just couldn't afford it? This digital inclusion divide question. Do you reckon the COVID session or through COVID sort of showed us more around this digital inclusion scenario? And I'm particularly interested, but given that you're in the private sector, because a lot of the time we talk about, NGOs and government fixing the digital divide, did you see more of it? Do you see more of it? You talk about the kindness, and do you see a role for business and the corporate industry side having a role in that? So it's a long question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. That is one that I have been thinking about. And, the digital divide, we talk about the digital divide, is firstly very real. So we know that there are, I think when we went into lockdown, the Minister of Education was saying that there were 100,000 children that didn't have access to devices and the internet at home. And so that's obviously an issue. And a larger number of households, again, their access to devices and the internet were phones on mobile data plans rather than true internet or PC or tablet-based access, which is obviously not a good learning experience. I think we're very rapidly approaching the point where you would have to regard the internet as a basic right, like water and electricity. But I'd make the point that those other basic rights, even housing, are largely supplied through the private sector. So I don't think it's an either-or situation. The other point I'd make, that I think we have to look at the glass half full side as well, is that the internet is a great leveler of opportunity. And look, the internet is full of cat pictures, and a lot of people get a lot of pleasure out of that. But it's also got all the knowledge in the world, and the greatest teachers in the world. And so if I'm, whatever my household, whatever my personal status, I have access to the entire world if you give me this window.
Yeah, a really good point. Hey, I'm going to ask you a question that's just popped into my mind, which I haven't talked to you about, which is we're in this phase in New Zealand, we're in level 1, and you talked about your Australian colleagues, and I've been talking to some of my colleagues in Melbourne in particular, this lockdown scenario. And the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health yesterday, or the day before, talked about how important contact tracing is going to be and how few people are using the contact tracing app. Now, as a technologist, how would you fix that? And do you think, because we've seen, there was all this talk about the Singaporean model, but that hasn't worked that well either. So it's not a question we practice. So have you got a thought, or that I sent you, have you got a thought about how that might be able to be done?
Look, I'm not an expert in that area. I think largely, particularly while we're in level one and there isn't actually a sense of impending crisis on us at the moment, that automation is probably the key to this. And as I say, I'm not an expert, but I saw some commentary, a couple of months ago about the idea of a Bluetooth credit card type thing that just did automated tracking and tracing, and you just had it on your person. You didn't have to do anything. And honestly, I think at the moment, trying to get people to do anything that requires action on their part is going to be difficult because we do not have that sense of crisis.
Yeah, I think you're right. That automation is the key. All right, let's get back onto the topic. That one just popped up in my brain a minute ago, and I thought as a technologist you might have a few. I want to talk now in the last 8 minutes or so we got about the future, because when we did the webinar with you guys, you certainly came across as having some ideas and thoughts about where we might go. So first of all, I want to talk. So I'm going to take you through a couple of questions. The first one I want to do is like immediately now. So looking to where we are in our journey, and I'm not sure you can call it post-COVID, but level one, we'll say that. In level one, how do you view technology strategically supporting us through these challenging economic times we're going to be facing? And if you can talk about it nationally and internationally, it'd be even better. So yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I love this subject. I think first of all that New Zealand is just so lucky. We have been lucky and we have done well as a country. And we're in level one, and look, our lives are essentially normal apart from international travel. And I talk with my colleagues, I've got friends and relations in the UK, their lives are completely different and miserable, and the US is probably even worse. So first of all, we should be grateful and happy that we're in this country and we're in this situation. Now, we do have an immediate issue because our borders are closed, and that is affecting a large part of our traditional economy, which is obviously dedicated to serving international tourism. I think calling for the borders to open on economic grounds is just political, and my personal view is that that would be completely the wrong thing to do, that we have to accept that that sector is going to suffer for a while, and we need to think about ways that we could redeploy that. Now, obviously, there's two sides to shutting the borders. People can't come here, but of course our people can't holiday overseas. So I think the programs we're seeing to promote domestic tourism, people still need breaks from their jobs, people still want to take time with their families. Well, now they can do that, in the far north instead of Rarotonga, or in the far south instead of going skiing in Colorado, they can go skiing in Corona, right? And I think there's also, perhaps even in the more medium term, an opportunity to think about moving some of those jobs from international tourism support, which let's face it, is not a high value occupation. We're not talking, strategic jobs here. To a large extent, it's part of a service economy. But moving those jobs into something where we can perhaps add more value to our primary produce. We're still going to be producing food and high quality agricultural produce. And we've talked for years about moving up the value chain with that. So maybe here's a chance to think about some of the ways we could do that. And the other thing, of course, just in the technology area, is that technology is a borderless export. So we don't mind, we don't care that the borders are closed. We're still, at Jade, we're still selling software into the UK and Australia, even though we can't physically go there. It just zizzes across the wires. It doesn't need a visa, it doesn't need an airplane.
Yeah, and it's how we're going to. There is something in there about how we're going to retrain or move people into those areas, isn't there? There's a whole nother conversation and question to be had, discussion to be had with other people about that as well. Right? Okay, so just take a little bit further into your future, because I know you like the future. So sort of like limit yourself a little bit though. In 5 years' time from where we are now, what transformation or digital transformation do you think will have happened and that would benefit New Zealand? Because the world is, post-COVID, is not going to be the same as it was pre-COVID, is it?
No, that's right. I think, well, firstly, I know that it's easy to overestimate how much stuff is going to change in the short term. And I'm also acutely aware that you're videoing this, so it's actually going to be on record.
Yeah, that's right.
What I would say is harking back to the earlier comment about how well placed we are with UFB in place, that we will continue to invest in architectures and infrastructure that will be taking us into the future over the next 5 years. And obviously one of the things I'm thinking of here is 5G. And I think that as we continue to roll out 5G and then to take advantage of 5G with things like the Internet of Things and additional sensors and a lot more CCTV and stuff, that to some extent we'll see automation and things just happening in a way that currently doesn't happen and requires manual intervention. I think we'll also see acceleration of the trends we're already seeing over 5 years, so that we'll just be more and more connected and more remote and collaborative.
Yeah, I got just an interesting thought that I was having this morning. You know, when we invested in UFB, there was a discussion around, well, why would you build a network when there's nothing to be actually you can do with it? Or, you know, it's like remember the old quote about the CEO of IBM who said there might only ever need to be 5 computers in the world.
Yeah.
It's like there is something to investing and building in capability before people know what to do with it, isn't there?
Yes, and I think that's particularly true of this sort of core infrastructure that TUANZ is working with. Yeah. These are core things that we just have to have in order to be able to build the future.
It's a little bit around this 5G thing too. People are asking, well, what are the business cases for 5G? Well, actually, when you go back, what were the business cases for 4G and 3G? So it is a little bit like that, where you can be a little bit blasé and say, well, it's not going to happen. And I do heard your comment around, you know, sometimes we overestimate what can be done in 5, but actually you just never know, do you? Something might pop out. You know, Jade may come up with this amazing killer app, which needs 6G everywhere straight away. So yeah. Hey, look, last question. Let's think about the future, even going beyond the 5 year, you know. Now think about it as a futurist, you know, what are the really exciting technologies that you see around or that you've dreamed up that you think will come into fruition in some sort of time frame in the future for you?
Yeah, great question. You know, I do love the future, and my only regret about being the age I am is that limits how much of it I'm going to see. And I look at the young children and I think of, you know, babies being born today who are going to be alive in 2100. And you think of the amount of technological change that we've seen in the last 80 years when we've gone from, you know, I mean, that's just like before the Second World War, that we had horse-drawn armies, you know. When we get to 2100, it is, I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but I know it's going to be amazing. And I think our children and our babies that are being born now are going to see amazing things. And there's sort of somewhere in between that we might still have hopes of seeing, you know, from our rest homes. I think we're going to see a breakthrough in battery technology.
Okay.
I'm confident that the amount of research and just the requirements, and we talk about mobility and ride access and stuff, all of that depends on battery. Electric vehicles depend on battery. So if and when we get that breakthrough in battery, which I'm confident will happen, then we'll move to a situation where we have abundant energy. And energy is a driver for everything. So when we have abundant energy, that opens up all sorts of opportunities. All sorts.
Yeah.
And in the more consumery side, I think we're going to see a lot more in the area of wearables. And so at the moment, we use our phones as, they're not even really phones. I don't know why we still call the damn things phones. How often do you use it as a phone, right? It's like a personal communication and connection device. And that'll just expand out, and voice and visual become more and more natural parts of it. We're not be pecking away on keyboards. I think things like 3D printing are only in their infancy. And so as we move forward, and digitization means that I'll be able to order stuff and it will print out in my garage and I'll just go and get it from my garage.
Yeah. That's very Star Trek-like, John.
Yes, but a lot of the stuff we're doing now was Star Trek-like. If you look at something like James Bond, and James Bond isn't that old, and even get poor old Maxwell Smart, about half or more than half of the technology and stuff they were using was to do with communications.
Yeah, true.
2 phones, the radio hidden behind the console of the Aston Martin. The communications was actually the enabler for the spies, and now everyone's got it. Star Trek's here, and we're moving beyond.
Cool. Any other final things you've got bubbling away?
No, I think I'll leave it there.
Just going to finish with the because you made a comment at the webinar about driverless cars. You talked about electric cars and batteries. How far away do you think driverless cars are?
I think we already had cars that are capable of self-driving in favourable conditions, and I think the key thing here is that to be truly driverless cars, they need to be 100% safe, 100%-ish safe in every conceivable circumstance. And it's very easy. It's very much a Pareto thing. Yeah. It's very easy to get the first 80%, and then it's harder, but still easy to get 80% of what's left. It's that last little bit that is very, very difficult. And so I think it's closer than we think, but I wouldn't like to say it's 5 years away, except in controlled circumstances at least.
All righty. Hey, look, John, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great speaking to you. And there's some really good little clips and bits in there that really are keen to explore a little bit further. And maybe next time I'm in Christchurch, I'll come out and see you and we can have a decent chat. So again, thank you.
Oh, it's wonderful. Look, thank you so much for the time to come and talk with you. And I really enjoy our conversations. Thank you very much.
All righty. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.